Hello YouTubers and welcome to another episode. Today we're doing something a little bit different and we're comparing two of Polar's top end fitness watches. The Polar Grit X and the brand new Polar Vantage V2. What are the differences between both of these watches? To start with, there is price. You can get the Polar Grit X for around about £379 and the Vantage V2 is around about £449. So what do you get for the extra amount of money? Well, there is the first thing of looks. Obviously they look slightly different. To me, the Grit X looks a bit more rugged for those outdoorsy types. For the Vantage V2, this watch looks a bit more like you could wear it with a nice sports jacket. It's a bit more smooth. The watch band itself contours itself into the watch head, watch face. It is removable, so you can change them just like the Grit X. But as you can see in the Grit X, the watch does not really run smoothly into the watch strap, whereas in the V2 it does. And that's pretty much the big thing about how they look. The looks of the two watches, very simply, a bit more rugged for the Grit X, a bit less rugged looking for the Vantage V2, because the actual stats of them both are pretty much the same. Water resistant to the same level of 100 meters. They have the same heart rate sensors on the back now, which was a problem with the Vantage V. They had an older sensor on there, but now they've updated it to the V2. They've put what they have in the Grit X. So moving on to the performances of both the watches, I've been able to test the Vantage V2 for about a week now, just before the release, whereas the Grit X I've been using daily for about a couple of months. So I've switched over for last week to see how this compares to the Grit X. To be honest, very similar. The Polar ecosystem, when you buy one watch, becomes very recognizable when you use one of their other watches, but there are a couple of features on the Vantage V2 that are slightly different to that on the Grit X. So basically the big things for me are the music controls. So you can get some notifications on both watches from your phone, but you can control the music from the Vantage V2. You can't do that with the Grit X. Both watches are fantastic at recording your heart rate. Whether you're doing more static exercises, you can record your heart rate via the wrist sensors on the back, or whether you're doing more vigorous exercise, you can connect it to a Bluetooth heart rate strap. I use a Polar H10 and it doesn't seem to have any issues there. You connect them on the watches, on the settings, really easily, and away you go to record your heart rate there. The calories are pretty much the same. The GPSs on these two are pretty much the same. I wore them both on my wrist at the same time. I knew the heart rate wouldn't quite be the same recording on the wrist, but I wanted to see the GPS, the speed, etc. when I was on the water, when I was rowing, to see if they were comparable, and they pretty much gave me the exact same speeds and the exact same distances for the workouts I did comparing both watches. So very good to see that they are both very good at doing what they are supposed to do. But like I said, the real biggest difference between the two currently is the music controls. When you start to dive a little bit deeper, the Vantage V2 offers a couple of more tests that you can do versus the Grit X. For example, the leg recovery test, which basically gives you an idea of how your legs are doing, especially for sports like running. It doesn't quite give you a great idea if you're applying it to rowing, but if you do it over time, hopefully you can sort of see which numbers apply to you, and you can kind of use that in your array of data that you can get from these watches and see, okay, if that's saying I'm tired, and for example the heart rate saying I'm tired, and for example FitSpark and the nightly recharge data all suggesting you're tired, then you are probably tired. Whereas, for example, if the leg recovery tests say your legs are tired, but the FitSpark, if the nightly recharge all say you're not tired, then you have to decide in yourself whether you are tired or not. Speaking of nightly recharge and FitSpark, very similar on both watches. What I've noticed between the two watches as well is the Grit X seems slightly more sluggish compared to the Vantage V2. When flicking through menus, when syncing it to my phone, it just seems to be that little more on top of it versus the Grit X. Not a huge difference, but when you have them side by side, you can kind of tell that they are a little bit different there. The screens themselves seem to be slightly different. If you look really closely and do a little bit of pixel peeping, it looks like the Vantage V2 has slightly higher definition versus the Grit X, but again, this is really nitpicky, and they're both incredibly easy to read at all times, regardless of sunlight or no light at all. You've got the little backlights as well on both of them if you want to turn them on, but also when you flick your wrist, the backlights turn on. And that is pretty much it for the comparison between the Grit X and the Polar Vantage V2. It is really, really simple and really, really hard to sort of distinguish between the two watches. I would say if you're not looking for that little bit extra on their tests and the music controls, and you want something that looks a little bit more rugged, I would say they are in fact as rugged as each other, then the Grit X might be something to look at. But if you want something that looks a little bit more refined and has those test features and controls the music on your phone, well, the Vantage V2 is for you. Being a professional athlete, both of these watches have been absolutely fantastic at tracking my workouts, as well as syncing it to Polar Flow. The whole Polar Flow ecosystem is absolutely great, but it doesn't really differ between watches, hence I've not really spoke about that. You basically just hold the button down on each watch and it syncs straight to Polar Flow and then out to all of your necessary apps. And the data both of them can give is phenomenal. Let me know in the comments below what you think of these two watches, or if you would like to see any other comparison videos of any other fitness watches or fitness gadgets, rowing related or not, to see what I can do. And as always, Yam Squad, hopefully you've enjoyed the video, and remember to subscribe if you haven't already, hit that like button, and I will see you in the next episode.